The morning sun cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Harvex Tower like a knife through silk. 52 floors above the busy streets of New York City. The air smelled of fresh coffee, expensive cologne, and something else, something sharp and invisible that you could not name but could absolutely feel. Fear. Not the kind of fear that makes you run. The kind that makes you sit very still, smile very carefully, and pray nobody notices your hands are shaking. The Harvex Group's main boardroom was the kind of room that made people feel small on purpose. The table was long and black and polished so perfectly that you could see your own face in it, looking back at you, judging you, asking if you really belonged here. 20 high-backed chairs lined each side. Crystal glasses caught the light and threw little rainbows onto the walls. At the far end, a massive screen displayed one number in bold white letters against a black background. $847 million. $847 million. That was what today's meeting was worth. That was the number sitting in the middle of the room, like a sleeping giant that nobody wanted to wake up wrong. Marcus Harvex stood at the head of the table. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, and had the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago. He had built his empire from a single logistics company in Ohio into a global operation that touched 34 countries. He had sat across from presidents, prime ministers, and the most powerful CEOs on earth. But today, even Marcus Harvex looked tightly wound, because today's guests were different. The Zhaolin Group had flown in from Chengdu, China. 7 executives, led by a sharp, quiet man named Director Fong Wei, who had not smiled once since stepping off his private jet. Behind him sat 2 legal advisors, 2 financial analysts, and 2 silent men whose job titles nobody had been told. They communicated mostly in Mandarin, occasionally in a rare regional dialect from the Sichuan province that even the Chinese embassy translator had once described as difficult. There were also 3 guests from a German engineering firm called Brandt Technisch, who preferred their conversations in German and became visibly uncomfortable when things switched to English without warning, and a single French-speaking delegate named Madame Celeste Moreau, representing a European investment consortium, who wore a cream blazer and had the calm, watchful energy of a woman who had ended careers with a single well-placed sentence. All of them were here. All of them needed to understand each other perfectly. And that was the problem. Against the left wall, a row of chairs had been set up for the interpreters. 6 of them to start. Professionals in dark blazers with small earpieces and folders of prepared terminology. They had been briefed the night before. They had studied the contract documents. They had rehearsed technical phrases relating to logistics infrastructure, international trade compliance, multi-jurisdictional liability frameworks, and supply chain architecture. They thought they were ready. They were not ready. The meeting began at 9 o'clock sharp. For the first 11 minutes, everything was fine. Then Director Fong Wei leaned forward and asked a question in Mandarin. A simple question, or so it seemed. The first interpreter, a young woman named Clara who had a master's degree in translation from Columbia University, put her hand to her earpiece and began. She stopped, started again, frowned. The word Fong Wei had used, a specific term relating to cross-border data sovereignty within bonded logistics frameworks, did not exist in the standard Mandarin business glossary she had prepared. It was technical. It was layered. It came wrapped in a cultural assumption about state ownership that had no clean English equivalent. Clara translated it as data protection preferences. Director Fong Wei's expression did not change, but the 2 silent men behind him exchanged a look, just a flicker, just half a second. Marcus Harvex noticed. He noticed everything. By the 40-minute mark, the second interpreter had confused 2 entirely different contract clauses while switching between German and English, causing one of the Brandt Technisch delegates to push his chair back slightly from the table. A small movement, but the kind that meant I am no longer comfortable. Madame Moreau had twice asked for clarifications to be repeated in French, and the third interpreter, a man who had listed French as his primary language on his CV, had rendered a complex liability clause in a way that made it sound like the European consortium was being asked to accept full financial risk for a project they were only partly funding. Madame Moreau had gone very quiet after that, which was worse than her saying something. By 11 o'clock, They were on the fifth interpreter. The room had changed. The crystal glasses were still throwing rainbows on the walls, but nobody was looking at them anymore. People were looking at the table, or at their phones, or at the door. The deal, the $847 million sleeping giant, was beginning to stir, and not in a good way. By noon, they were on the 8th. By 1:15, the 9th, and then the 10th. A heavy-set, confident man named Bernard who had arrived with 3 different dictionaries and had announced, loud enough for the whole room to hear, that he had never failed a translation in his life. Bernard lasted 22 minutes. When Director Fong Wei asked him to explain a passage about tri-jurisdictional arbitration, override clauses in relation to force majeure triggers within bonded freight corridors, Bernard opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and then set his folder down on the table very slowly. "I need to make a call," Bernard said. He walked out of the room and did not come back. The silence that followed was the loudest silence any of them had ever heard. Marcus Harvex looked at the empty interpreter's chair. Then he looked at the clock. Then he looked at the faces around the table. The tight jaw of Director Fong Wei, the raised eyebrow of Madame Moreau, the barely concealed frustration of the Brandt Technisch delegates. And for the first time in 23 years of deal-making, Marcus Harvex did not know what to do next. That was when he heard it, a small sound, the quiet squeak of wheels on marble floor. He turned. At the far edge of the room, almost invisible against the wall, a woman in a pale blue uniform was pushing a cleaning cart slowly toward the door. She had clearly been there for a while, working quietly, wiping surfaces, emptying the small bins near the side cadenzas. The kind of person that a room full of billionaires looks straight through without seeing. She was about 40 years old, small, unhurried. Her hair was pulled back neatly. Her shoes were clean but worn thin at the toe. She had almost made it to the door. Almost, but she had stopped, and she was looking at the empty chair. Marcus Harvex stared at her. She was not looking at the chair the way someone looks at furniture. She was looking at it the way someone looks at a door they had been standing outside of for a very long time. "Excuse me," Marcus said. The room turned. The cleaning lady looked up. Her eyes were calm. Completely, unnervingly calm. "Were you listening?" Marcus asked. "This whole time, were you listening to this meeting?" She did not flinch. She did not look embarrassed. She simply said, in a voice as steady as still water, "Yes, and if you'll permit me, I understood every word." Nobody moved. Not the executives. Not the delegates. Not the legal advisors or the 2 silent men behind Director Fong Wei, who had spent the entire morning giving nothing away. Every single person in that room was looking at the cleaning lady, and she was looking back at them, not with nervousness, not with the apologetic shrinking that people sometimes do when they suddenly realize they have spoken out of turn in a room full of important people. She stood the way a person stands when they have been carrying a secret for so long that putting it down finally feels like relief. Marcus Harvex had not become a billionaire by ignoring things that did not fit the pattern. And this woman, small, quiet, in her pale blue uniform with her worn-down shoes, did not fit any pattern he had ever seen in this room. "Come here," he said. It was not unkind, but it was the voice of a man who was used to being obeyed. She left her cart by the wall and walked to the center of the room. She did not rush. She moved with the careful, unhurried steps of someone who had learned long ago that rushing rarely changes anything important. She stopped beside the empty interpreter's chair, the one Bernard had abandoned. "Sit down," Marcus said. She sat. Director Fong Wei leaned forward slightly. His eyes were sharp and dark and gave nothing away. He said something in Mandarin. 4 words. Quiet and flat, like a test being placed on a desk in front of the student. The cleaning lady turned to him and answered in Mandarin. Fluent, clear, unhesitating Mandarin, and not the textbook kind. The real kind. The kind with the right tones, the right rhythm, the kind that sounds like a language actually lives inside the person speaking it rather than sitting on the surface like a coat they borrowed. Director Fong Wei blinked. It was the first change in his expression since he had walked through the door that morning. One of his legal advisors, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, turned to the director and whispered something quickly. The director gave a single, small nod. Then he looked at the cleaning lady again, and this time there was something new in his eyes. Curiosity. Marcus Harvex had watched all of this in about 12 seconds. He turned to the Brandt Technisch delegates. "Ask her something," he said. In German. Something technical. Something the other translators got wrong. The lead delegate, a broad-shouldered man named Klaus, who had spent the morning pressing his lips together tighter and tighter with every bad translation, raised an eyebrow. Then he shrugged, as if to say, "Why not? Nothing else has worked today," and spoke. He asked about the force majeure clause, the same dense, complicated sentence that had defeated interpreter after interpreter. He asked it in German, with all its technical weight, all its legal precision, the full complexity sitting inside it like stones. The cleaning lady listened. Then she turned to Marcus and the American executives and rendered the entire clause in English so clean and precise that one of Harvex's own legal advisors, a woman named Patricia, who had gone to Yale and charged $800 an hour, leaned forward and wrote something down on her notepad. Klaus stared. Then, slowly, he picked up his chair and moved it 2 inches closer to the table. It was a small thing, but in that room, in that moment, it meant everything. Madame Celeste Moreau had been watching all of this with the expression of a woman who has seen many things and is not easily impressed. She waited until the room had settled. Then she opened her mouth and spoke in French, rapid, elegant, Parisian French, the kind that curls around itself like smoke, and she asked about the liability clause, the one the earlier interpreter had mangled so badly that it sounded like the European consortium was signing away their financial safety net. The cleaning lady turned to her and answered in French, not just correct French, beautiful French, the kind of French that made Madame Moreau sit back in her chair and look at this woman the way you look at a painting you did not expect to affect you. When the cleaning lady finished, Madame Moreau was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly in French, "Where did you learn to speak like that?" And the cleaning lady answered, still in French, "From life, madam. Life is a very thorough teacher." Madame Moreau smiled. It was the first smile anyone in that room had produced all day. It changed the temperature of the entire space, the way a small fire changes a cold room. Marcus Harvex watched all of this and felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not surprise. He was past surprise now. Something deeper. Something that sat between wonder and shame and would not let him look away. "What is your name?" he asked. "Rosa," she said. "Rosa Mwangi." "Rosa." He said it carefully, like he was making sure he had it right. "How many languages do you speak?" Rosa folded her hands on the table in front of her. Clean hands. Careful hands. The hands of someone who had spent years doing work that left marks. "6, she said. "English, French, German, Spanish, Mandarin, and Hokkien." She paused. "Director Fong Wei's regional dialect," she added, looking briefly at the director, "is a Sichuan variation. I picked it up from a neighbor I had in Guangzhou 12 years ago. She was 73 and sold vegetables from a cart outside my building. She talked all day. I listened. The room was completely still. "You lived in China?" Marcus asked. "I have lived in many places," Rosa said simply. "My father was a diplomat's driver. We moved every 2 or 3 years when I was small. China, France, Germany, Mexico City. I was always a new child in the new school with the wrong accent." A small pause. "So I learned the right ones." Marcus leaned forward. "Where did you study? University?" Something shifted in Rosa's face. Not pain exactly. More like the memory of a door that had once been open and was now closed. "I had a scholarship," she said. "Linguistics. University of Nairobi. I finished 2 years." She stopped. "And then," Marcus asked, "and then my father got sick." She said it quietly, without drama. "Kidney failure. The treatment was expensive. My brothers were still in school. I was the oldest." She looked at her hands for just a moment, so I stopped. The room absorbed this. Nobody spoke. Not the executives. Not the delegates. Not the legal advisors. There's a particular kind of silence that a room full of powerful people produces when they're confronted with a truth they have no prepared response to. It is different from the awkward silences of earlier, the ones caused by failed translations and confusion. This silence was heavier, more honest, the kind that asked something of the people sitting inside it. Marcus Harveck sat inside it and felt it asking, "How long have you worked in this building?" He said finally. 3 years. Rosa said, 3 years. He repeated it. And in 3 years, nobody ever, he stopped himself, pressed his fingers against the table, started again. You have walked past his boardroom every day for 3 years. Every morning, she said, Monday to Friday, 6:15 to 6:45. I clean the room before the day starts. And you never said anything, never told anyone. Rosa looked at him with those steady, calm eyes, and she said something that would stay with every single person in that room for the rest of their lives. "Mr. Harvex," she said gently. Who would have listened? The question hung in the air like smoke. And Marcus Harvex, who had an answer for everything, who had built an empire on having the right words at exactly the right moment, found that he had nothing at all, because he knew, with a certainty that sat in his chest like a stone, that she was right. Not one person in that building. Not the HR directors, not the department heads, not the executives who walked past her every morning with their coffee cups and their eyes fixed on their phones. Not one of them had ever stopped. Not one of them had ever seen Rosa Mwangi standing quietly in the corner, holding a mop, and thought to ask, "Who are you? What do you carry? What can you do?" Director Fong Wei said something quietly in Mandarin. Rosa translated without being asked. She said, that in his culture there's a saying, the dragon does not announce itself. It simply rises. Fong Wei looked at Rosa as she finished. And then, for the first time all day, Director Fong Wei smiled. Something had broken open in that room. Not broken the way things break when they go wrong. Broken the way a seed breaks when something finally starts to grow. Marcus Harveck stood up, not to leave, not to make an announcement. He stood up the way a person stands when they need their body to match what is happening inside them, when sitting still no longer feels honest. He walked to the window. 52 floors below, the city moved in its usual rush. Taxis and pedestrians and delivery trucks, everyone going somewhere, everyone carrying something. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he turned back to the room. "Rosa," he said, "I want you to take that chair for the rest of this meeting. All of it. Every word, every clause, every question from every delegation. I want it going through you." Rosa looked at him steadily. "I am still on shift, Mr. Harvex." A small ripple moved through the room. One of the junior executives actually laughed, not mockingly, but with a slightly startled sound of someone who had just witnessed something unexpectedly real. Marcus Harvex almost smiled. "Almost. I think we can sort out your shift," he said. He turned to his head of operations, a compact, efficient man named Derek, who was already reaching for his phone. "Derek." "Already done," Derek said, not looking up. Rosa looked at the chair for one quiet moment, the same way she had looked at it earlier, like a door she had been standing outside of for a long time. Then she sat down, properly this time, not perched at the edge like someone ready to be asked to leave. She sat down fully, the way a person sits when they have decided they are not going anywhere, and the meeting resumed. What happened in the next 2 hours was the kind of thing that people who were in that room would describe differently depending on who they were. The legal advisors would say it was the most technically precise multilingual negotiation they had ever witnessed. The Brandt Technisch delegates would say the German to English rendering of the engineering specifications was cleaner than anything they'd encountered in 15 years of international contracts. Madame Moreau would later tell a colleague in Paris that the French interpreter they had finally found was extraordinary, and then pause and correct herself and say she was not an interpreter. She was something else entirely. Director Fong Wei said nothing publicly, but at one point, deep in the discussion of the tri-jurisdictional arbitration clause, the one that had broken Bernard, the one that had been sitting in the middle of the meeting like a lockbox all morning, Rosa translated a particularly dense passage from Mandarin into English, then immediately turned to the German delegates and rendered it again, and then without pausing, offered Madame Moreau a French version that carried a subtle but important cultural nuance about contractual trust that none of the written documents had captured. All three delegations nodded at exactly the same moment. It was the first time all day that everyone in the room had agreed on anything. Marcus Harvex watched it happen, and something moved across his face. Not the careful, controlled expression he wore like armor in rooms like this one. Something underneath that. Something human. The $847 million sleeping giant did not wake up angry. It simply opened its eyes, looked around, and decided it was safe. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the contracts were initialed. By 4:30, the handshakes had happened. By 5, Director Fong Wei's delegation was preparing to leave. The director himself paused at the door. He turned and looked across the room to where Rosa was quietly gathering the translation notes she had made in 4 different languages on a single yellow legal pad. He said something. Just a few words, soft and private. Rosa looked up and replied. They held each other's gaze for a moment. Two people who understood something about the world that the room full of expensive suits around them was only beginning to learn. Then Fong Wei nodded once, deeply, the kind of nod that means I see you. And he left. Madame Moreau stopped on her way out and pressed both of Rosa's hands between hers. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Klaus, the broad-shouldered German delegate who had spent the morning pressing his lips together, paused at the door, looked back at Rosa, and said in German, "You should have been in this room from the beginning." Rosa smiled and said, "Yes, I should have." When the room had emptied, Marcus Harvex sat back down at the head of the long black table. Just him and Rosa, and the quiet leftover energy of a day that had almost gone completely wrong. Derek hovered near the door with a tablet. The way Derek always hovered when Marcus was about to make a decision that needed to be documented. Marcus looked at Rosa. "Tell me what you want," he said. "Not what you think I'm offering. What you actually want." Rosa was quiet for a moment. This was not the silence of someone who did not know. It was the silence of someone who had known for a very long time and had simply never been asked. "I want to work," she said. "Real work. Work that uses what I actually have. I don't need a title that sounds impressive. I need a seat at the table where the important conversations happen." She paused. "I have spent 3 years cleaning the room where those conversations happen. I think I have waited long enough." Marcus Harvex nodded slowly. "Derek," he said. "Yes, sir. Create a new position. Head of International Communications and Cultural Strategy. Full salary, full benefits. Direct report to me." He looked at Rosa. "Effective Monday." Derek's fingers moved on the tablet. "Done." Rosa did not cry. She did not gasp or cover her mouth or any of the things that people do in movies when their lives change. She simply sat very still for a moment, the way you sit when something you've been carrying for a very long time has finally been set down. And she breathed, a long, slow, quiet breath. Then she said, "My father is still alive, Mr. Harvex. He is better now. He does not know I clean offices for a living. I told him I work in corporate services." A small smile touched the corner of her mouth. "I suppose that is about to become true." Marcus Harvex laughed. A real laugh. The rare kind. The kind that surprises the person producing it. It filled the big empty room and bounced off the polished table and the crystal glasses and the window with its view of 52 floors of city. "Yes," he said. "I suppose it is." Rosa Mwangi started her new role on a Monday morning. She walked through the same entrance she had walked through for 3 years. The same lobby, the same security desk, the same elevator bank, but she pressed a different button. Not B2, where the cleaning staff store their carts and punch their time cards. She pressed 52. The elevator opened directly into the executive floor. The receptionist looked up and smiled, a real smile, the prepared kind that people give to important arrivals. "Good morning. You must be Ms. Mwangi. Mr. Harvex is expecting you." Rosa stepped out of the elevator. She was wearing the same calm she had always worn. The same steady eyes. The same unhurried way of moving through space. None of that had changed, and none of it needed to. What had changed was simply this. The room she was walking into had finally decided to see her. Within a year, Rosa had renegotiated 3 international partnerships that had been stalled for months. She had built a multilingual communications team from scratch, specifically hiring people whose language skills had been overlooked because their resumes did not come from the right schools or the right neighborhoods. She had a small sign above her office door, not a fancy engraved plaque, just a piece of card she had written on herself. It said, "Talent does not check your address before it moves in." Marcus Harvex saw it once and stood in front of it for a long moment without saying anything. Then he had it engraved in bronze and installed in the lobby of every Harvex Group building in the world. There is something this story wants to leave with you, and it is this. Somewhere near you right now, in a building, on a bus, behind a counter, pushing a cart down a corridor, there's a person carrying something extraordinary that nobody has thought to ask about. They are not invisible because they have nothing to offer. They are invisible because the people with the power to see them have been too busy looking at the chairs they expected talent to arrive in. Rosa Mwangi spent 3 years cleaning a room where million-dollar decisions were made. She only needed one afternoon to change everything. The question the story leaves in your hands is a simple one. Who in your world have you been looking straight through? Because somewhere right now, a dragon is waiting, not to be discovered, just to be seen. If this story moved something in you, if it made you think or feel or look at someone differently, then it has done exactly what it came to do. Like this story, if Rosa deserved that seat. Share it with someone who needs to hear that unseen brilliance is still brilliance. And subscribe, because more stories like this one are waiting. Stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stories that remind us what we are all capable when someone finally decides to listen. The next story is already coming. Don't miss it.